I'm Dean Newlund, and welcome to the Business of Intuition, where I coach, facilitate, train, and speak on the hard science and meaningful experience of intuitive leadership in business, so you can make better decisions, forge real connections, and creatively solve problems to amplify your impact and simplify your life. Welcome to the Business of Intuition. Get your arms around this idea. Your company culture mirrors your company's brand, and your company's brand mirrors your company's culture. This particular idea became very clear to me during my interview with a guy named Steve Robinson. I found it fascinating, and he said three other things that really got me thinking. Number one, hire for culture, don't train for it. Two, great brands are, again, a reflection of great cultures, and both should be developed simultaneously. And three, while not always possible, but what if we had the mindset that we were going to hire people for life? Now, most of the time, what happens is that we have siloed functions that are not aligned. We do a strategic plan. We sometimes have to get it approved by the board. We operate that strategic plan into some sort of an operating plan as well. Then we throw it over the fence to our marketing department, who then needs to come up with some sort of communication plan and to make sure it aligns with our overall brand strategy. All of these things are very important, but they're done in isolation. But what again if our brand and our culture were synonymous? If they were connected and mirrors of one another, how would we then be leading and managing the growth of our companies? And that's really the focus of today's conversation on the Business of Intuition. My guest again is a guy named Steve Robinson, and Steve has had really just a fantastic career. He's written a wonderful book that I highly recommend that those of you who are not just about branding their companies, but about creating great cultures should in fact read. Steve is a consultant, author, and speaker on organizational culture, design, and leadership, brand strategy development, marketing planning, and distinctive advertising principles. He was the former executive vice president and chief marketing officer at Chick-fil-A, which is really the bulk of what his book is about as a backdrop. Fascinating story. Prior to joining that company, he was the director of marketing at Six Flags Over Georgia theme park in Atlanta. And his role was preceded by marketing positions at two other Six Flag properties and the communication manager role that he had over at Texas Instruments. After beginning his career at Chick-fil-A and marketing, Steve went on to serve as vice president of the department, before becoming chief marketing officer. And his most recent role, he was responsible for overseeing marketing, advertising, and brand development, menu development, etc., and hospitality strategies. During Steve's tenure at Chick-fil-A, the company went from 184 stores and 100 million to 2,100 stores and 6.8 billion, and became one of the most iconic brands of our time. Mr. Steve Robinson on the Business of Intuition. Well, Steve, I have to say, I'm really looking forward to having this conversation. As I said to you earlier, that I've started reading your book, which is just a fantastic journey into your life, the life of your founder, and of course, the wonderful work you've done on branding and culture over at Chick-fil-A. I think that it's very common in organizations to have the marketing department develop many different kinds of campaigns to be able to attract new customers, whether it be, collateral or websites or things on social media. The whole branding process seems to be so focused on, let's attract some more customers. Let's get people, right? And I don't know, there's very few of them that I run into that make the branding of a company an integral part of the development and the care and feeding of the culture, meaning that they're like separate things. Culture's over here, branding and marketing is over there, and never will the two meet. Tell me why and how you and others at Chick-fil-A were able to bring branding, which you've done a tremendous job around, and the development of this culture?
Wow. That's an easy, that sounds like an easy question.
It does, doesn't it?
It's a very long, answer.
I get it. Yeah.
On 35 or 40 years of experience. Well, let me go back a little bit, Dean. Prior to coming to Chick-fil-A, I joined them in January of 1981. I was director of marketing for Six Flags Over Georgia in Atlanta. And back then, Six Flags was a pretty strong brand marketing-oriented company in their own right. But their marketing was very transactional-oriented, which is, in effect, what you just described, the separate silos. How do we drive traffic? How do we build transactions? Well, that's marketing's job.
Right.
And that was kind of the culture I was in at Six Flags. So from a purely marketing point of view, I had some great mentors, not just in Atlanta, but at multiple Six Flags parks and at the home office and studying other people in the entertainment industry. So my phone rings and I'm having fun. Okay. So my phone rings one evening in August of 1980, and it's the COO for Chick-fil-A, who I'd met previously. I explained that in the book. I'd met him about 2 years earlier. And he says, "Steve, have you got a minute to talk?" I well, sure. His name was Jimmy Collins. I said, "Jimmy, what do you got in your mind? By the way, hello, I haven't seen you in a couple of years." He said, "Well, we don't have a marketing department, and we've decided we need one. Your name keeps coming up, and I want to know if you would be interested in talking to us." Now, Dean, one of the funny parts of this is in the back of my mind when he said, "We don't have a marketing department." I'm thinking to myself, well, I already knew you didn't have a marketing department, or you would have done that in-park restaurant deal that I was trying to sell you 2 years ago. That's how we met. But I was flattered. Six Flags was owned by this time, it was owned by Penco, which came out of the Penn Central bankruptcy. And so we're getting this increased pressure for quarterly earnings and cash flow management. We're not spending as much on, investing in the brand park experience as we used to. And I'm starting to get this sense that Six Flags is up against some pretty hard cultural shift. And so I said, "Jimmy, I'd love to visit." Privately owned. I knew a little bit about them. At the time, about 100 stores. They were all in malls. Okay. So what's 2 or 3 days of interviewing? If nothing else, I'll learn something. All right, I'm going to jump ahead. And this is all answering your question. So be patient with me here.
I'm getting there. No worries.
I'm going to jump ahead to December, and I'm sitting in the office of the founder of Chick-fil-A, Truett Cathy, who's almost 60. And I'm still interviewing. Still. 5 months of it.
Wow.
And I look at Truett and I said, "Truett, I think I could help you guys. Love what you got here. I spent the better part of 5 months now interviewing with you and your team and Jimmy and others, and I'm doing it still. And I do still enjoy the job I have at Six Flags. What are you looking for in the ideal marketing person? And am I the guy?" And there's this long pause, and Truett puts down his sandwich. We were eating in his office, Chick-fil-A sandwich, of course.
Oh, of course.
And he says, "I have absolutely no idea. Whatever it is, I don't want to do it." Now, remember, I asked him, "What are you looking for in the ideal marketing guy?" And he tells me, "I have no idea." But I'm trusting Jimmy and others to determine if you can do the job. I'm more interested in who you are. I want to know if I can trust you, if you and I can have fun together, if people will enjoy working with you, because if we invite you to Chick-fil-A, it's my intent you're never going to go anywhere else.
Interesting.
Okay, I already had 4 different jobs in 8 years, so that was a shock. My expectation is you're never going to go anywhere else. And at some point, you're going to be a major player in this business if we invite you here. You need to understand the most important decisions we make at Chick-fil-A are who we invite into the organization.
Great point.
So we don't rush it.
Right.
And he says, and by the way, we don't, and he used these words, "We don't train culture here, we hire it."
Fantastic.
I said, "Okay, I think I love your company. I think I align with your values. When do you think you might make this decision?" He says, "I don't know. Jimmy will let you know." Well, they let me go 2 weeks later. Okay, so I tell you that story because I'm learning a great deal about Chick-fil-A culture through the interview process, and that interview with Truett, I guess, was the exclamation point that the key to a great organization, and Chick-fil-A certainly is one, is clarity on the part of leaders of what kind of a culture you're trying to create. And at the end of the day, the culture you create is formed by the people you invite to join it.
So can you hold for a second on this one, Steve? This is really
Yes.
I wrote this down and it's going to be floating around in my head for a while, that you said essentially we hire culture, we don't train for it.
Yes.
At the same time, in reading your book and getting to know Chick-fil-A a little bit better, you've defined culture pretty well.
Yes.
And I'm sure that you've got ways to ensure that people are aligned to that culture after they've been hired. So it's not right.
Okay, so this is now, I'm on board January of 1981. And I'm jumping ahead. 1982, there's a major financial crisis in America. The price of money is over 18%.
Right.
All of a sudden, mall development stops, retail sales crash.
Yep.
Truett comes to his young executive committee, of which I am now part, and he said, what are you guys going to do about this cash flow problem? And of course, we're all looking at each other. Well, we didn't create the problem, but nonetheless, he said, we got to figure out what we're going to do with this cash flow problem. Well, let me remind you, I borrowed $10 million to build the first office building. And if that's not enough, the first major promotion that I'd been a part of helping to organize for the spring of 1982 had gone over budget by $2 million. We have a major problem. And I have personally contributed to it. So we go off site. Now, this again is getting to the point you just made. We go off site for 3 days to try to handle the cash flow problem. Dean, we're well into the first day. We've cut budgets. We've frozen hire. We've frozen the number of stores we're going to do. We've adjusted the marketing plan. We've done everything we think we know to do to help with the cash flow problem. And Truett's oldest son, Dan Cathy, sitting there late in the afternoon. He says, I'm not sure we're talking about the right thing anymore. What do you mean? Over half the Chick-fil-A operators and over half the Chick-fil-A staff have joined us in the last 2 years. I don't know if they know how Truett is looking at this situation. At the end of the day, this is Truett's business. How does Truett look at this crisis? Through what filter? And so for the next 2 days, we just listened to Truett. Truett, why do you get up in the morning to come to Chick-fil-A? Why is this business important to you? How do you see this business? I'm telling you this because as of 1982, there was nothing in writing about the culture of Chick-fil-A. In the next 2 days, we wrote the corporate purpose by listening to Truett, what was really important to him. And what we heard were 3 big ideas. He wanted to glorify God through the business because he considered the business a gift from God. He wanted the business to glorify God by the way it was run, by the way we behaved in the marketplace. Number 2, he wanted to have a positive influence on people. He wanted the business to be a platform for service and for ministry, and to create an economic platform for people to thrive who were part of it. And 3rd, he wanted to do all that by being great stewards. You basically got 2 assets. You got people, you got money. And he wanted to be great stewards of that. If we were great stewards, and he was convinced we had the opportunity potentially to glorify God and have a positive influence. So we wrote the corporate purpose to glorify God by being a positive influence on all who come in contact with Chick-fil-A, and to have a positive influence on all who come in contact with the brand. Now, stewardship was at the focus for him. But here's the key. That corporate purpose, which is I unpack in great detail in the book.
Yeah.
Not one word of it has changed. And over my 35 years there, what I learned was that we constantly kept going back to that corporate purpose, even when we're wrestling with key decisions of how we're going to spend money and how we're going to exercise influence in the marketplace.
Right.
So I think part of defining a great culture is being very, very clear on why the business exists.
Yes.
Now, I'm not suggesting every business is going to reflect Chick-fil-A's. It won't. But what I will say that here's the 2 key things that I learned from our corporate purpose. It was aspirational, but it was also practical. It impacted how we thought about the business. It impacted how we cast vision, but it also impacted how we made decisions, how we made choices. Where is that incremental dollar going to go? Where is the best utilization of manpower and talent? And in the context, we're making those decisions, hopefully, to be doing it in a way that glorifies God and also has a positive influence on others. Now, the other thing.
Can I ask you a quick question, Steve?
Yes.
Sorry, because I could listen to you all day, but I want to ask you something that came up as you were talking here. You mentioned this purpose around glorifying God and this higher calling that you have. Certainly, that is a not unfamiliar thought. Purpose statements are often around being able to add value beyond oneself,
Yes.
Wanting to make the world a better place. Is the subtext of Chick-fil-A to bring more people to God?
No. I would say the answer is no. I would say the subtext is to serve and interact with people in such a way that people might realize that Christ is real in the life of the person they're interacting with.
But it's not a. You're not.
It's not
You're not evangelizing.
No.
But you're living the principles.
That is correct.
Understood.
And which was the other part of what came out of those 3 days was about a half a dozen key principles. We asked Trude, okay, as we make decisions of business, as we interact with people in business, can you identify non-negotiables that you want to define the box top of how we behave? Some people would say value.
Right.
Again, I'm summarizing generosity. I want to have fun. I want people to have fun at Chick-fil-A. Stewardship, excellence, creativity, opportunity to empower others. So when you get into my book and you start hearing about independent operators who actually run those businesses, they don't own them, but they run those businesses.
Because it's corporately owned, correct? I mean,
they're all corporately owned. Yeah.
And there's $0 to get in. Is that correct?
Well, you put down a $10,000 deposit, but
all right,
that's correct.
But then you get reimbursed through sales later.
Yeah. Their income is half net pre-tax operating profit.
Right.
So when I joined Chick-fil-A, the average Chick-fil-A operator was making about $40,000 from a mall store. Today, I will just tell you that number is about 12 or 13x that.
Yeah.
Huge. Hasn't changed.
And is it also true, Steve, that an operator can only operate one Chick-fil-A?
That is the standard.
This is standard.
There are exceptions based upon whether there's another store that's going to a new store that's going to dramatically cannibalize their territory.
Right.
And if that operator has an existing leadership bench that is capable of taking on another store.
Okay.
But the standard is one operator, one store. That's correct. So, but when I name those 6 values, when you read the Chick-fil-A story, you're going to see creativity. You're going to sense fun. We had fun. I mean, creativity was part of the fun. It was, and then we had an empowering environment. When I asked True, what do you think you're going to want me to be doing as a marketing director? And he says, I have no idea. You know how many times he called me to his office and say, I don't understand why you did that or did that. Even the time I made the $2 million mistake, 0. If he trusted you, he left you alone. You were empowered. And what that does, Dean, is it creates this incredible environment of ingenuity and creativity and smart, calculated risk-taking. And he would be over here on the side waiting for us to do all the creativity work and figure out whether the marketplace would value it, pay for it. He was not into the numbers. When I brought him recommendations about waffle fries or char-grilled chicken or college football or cows selling chicken, about all I got out of him was, it sounds like a good idea to me. Really? Now, did he expect me, remember, stewardship part of this deal, did he expect me and my team to do our homework? Absolutely.
Yeah.
And trust me, there were other guys in finance wanting to know what the numbers look like.
Yeah.
But I think I made the point between why we exist and what these non-negotiables were in the business and still are. They in and of themselves help attract the right kind of talent. They create a box top of what's in bounds and what's out of bounds. They create clarity around what kind of a brand you're trying to create. And it actually led to us creating in the strategic arena, a very clear brand essence statement, which said nothing about food.
Right.
The brand essence statement, which I unpack in the book, was where good meets gracious.
Mm. So that's where I think the link between creating this wonderful culture starts to mirror the brand.
It shapes strategy. Absolutely. Yes. And mirrors it shapes the brand. That's exactly right.
We're a consulting company. We've been around 30 years and we do a lot of strategic planning. And I've always wanted to involve the marketing department in those conversations for the very reason that we're talking here today, which doesn't always happen. How do you create a brand and relay it or link it to the culture? What was that like back at Chick-fil-A? Of course it was inspired by, but were there some telltale signs that we need to ensure that this particular campaign was not just inspired by the people who are in the room and we value fun, we value generosity and stewardship, yes. But is there something about the cow? Is there something about convert cows, the very famous images we see on the side of the road that says that's culture?
Yes. Well, I named one of the values, fun.
So fun shows up there. Got it.
So yeah, let me give you an example. The very first billboard went up in 1996 in Atlanta, just before the Summer Olympics. These two cows paid to eat more chicken.
Yeah.
Everybody else in the fast food business is showing product photography and price and deals.
Yeah.
And we intentionally decided we wanted our campaign to be fun. We didn't want to look like everybody else, but we did want to capture the essence of the Chick-fil-A brand. And we felt like it was a place where people could come and have fun, whether they were coming as a customer or even as a place to work.
Got it.
So eventually the Richards Group hit on this idea of these two cows. Okay, within the first week of this billboard going up, I get a phone call from Truett. He's in his office. Steve, can you come to my office? Sure. He virtually never called me up to his office. There's a guy sitting across the desk from me. Now, Truett lived on a little ranch south of Atlanta, and as a hobby, he raised Black Angus cattle. And he was a member of the Georgia Cattlemen's Association. So I walk into his office, and this guy's sitting there, and I'll call him Joe, and Truett says, Steve, I want you to meet Joe Smith here. He is president of the Georgia Cattlemen's Association. And he wants me to take down that billboard that you put up with those two cows telling people to eat more chicken. Now, he's got a completely buttoned up, straight-laced look on his face. This guy is serious as a heart attack.
Yeah, yeah.
And he looks at me, Troy looks at me, he says, what do you want to say to him? And I looked at him, and I said, well, Joe, Truett hired me to help him sell more chicken. It looks like cows are going to potentially help us do that. Have fun along the way. And I know Truett likes to have fun. And I know he likes cattle, but it's a hobby. He makes his living, however, selling more chicken. So unless he tells me to take down the two cows,
yeah,
I think we're going to leave that billboard up.
Yeah.
Truett just has this grin break out across his face. He looked at Joe. He said, Joe, I agree with Steve. We're going to leave the billboard up. Now, I tell you that story because I never showed that billboard to Truett before we put it up. He never approved it.
He just did.
But in that one moment, he loved that we had done it. And when I'm getting pushed by somebody wanting to take it down, he's saying, no, we're going to leave it up.
Yeah.
But that was typical of the culture he created. If he trusted people doing their homework, he trusted their intuition based on doing their homework. And there was something about the cows that struck his fancy, and nobody gave away more plush toy cows than Truett Cathy. He carried bags of them everywhere he went.
Got it.
He loved the campaign. So that is a little example of a cultural underpin, a cultural value that was specifically given to the agency. We want advertising that's fun, and they hit it out of the park.
Yeah, they did.
He knew they had done it when they did it.
So you've got a very important, strong leader, which some companies are blessed with. A lot of them aren't. that you've built a culture around. You said that 2 or 3 day offsite you just interviewed.
Yes. Yes.
And that became the foundation of the culture and how you defined it. How does one maintain a culture after the founder moves on?
Yes. Well, I think, first of all, while you have the founder, you capture stories. You give that founder as many opportunities as possible to give speeches and tell vignettes and stories that reflect what's important to him, whether it's excellence or creativity or fun, etc. So we had national meetings every year. Truett always spoke. He traveled to stores. He's always visiting with team members and operators. So we had the benefit of him for 30 plus years infiltrating the business with what was important to him through his own personal, not just his personality, but his own personal stories.
Right.
But in the process, everybody around him is learning, listening to these stories. We're having experiences, some of which I've already shared with you, where we're creating our own stories that reinforce and illustrate what's really important in the business.
Well, hence your book.
It's my book. And so what happens is the next generation of leaders learn from the founder. They learn from each other. They learn from their experiences. And quite frankly, I'm one of many who learn, as important as marketing and brand strategy is, it's not the most important thing I do. Talking about why we exist, what's really important, what kind of a brand are we trying to create. I cannot tell you how many dozens and dozens and dozens of speeches I gave to operator groups talking about why we're committed to creating a great brand where people feel cared for, more than I talked about how we're going to sell X percentage more sandwiches.
Right. That's fantastic.
And the purpose was, if we have more people that really feel like they're being cared for in your restaurant, you're going to sell more sandwiches than you can even imagine. And eventually, that's what happened. When we launched Second Mile Service, which I talk about in the book, in the second decade of the 2010s, when we launched Second Mile Service, which was the next major generational change to the brand experience, where we tried to bring hospitality that you'd get at a Ritz-Carlton or Nordstrom's into the Chick-fil-A fast food environment. It was not easy. And quite frankly, the catalyst was Truett years before that, asking operators to tell their team members when somebody said, "Thank you, will you please say my pleasure back?" Because he had experienced it at a Ritz-Carlton and he loved it. But how do you institutionalize hospitality across 50, 100, now 250,000 team members?
Right.
Well, you don't wing it, and you don't leave it to the individual personality and the persuasive power of an independent contractor, some of whom have the gift of hospitality, many of whom do not have that gift. You have to institutionalize it, just like Danny Myers institutionalizes it in his restaurants in New York, and how Ritz institutionalizes the contagious environment of saying my pleasure in their hotels.
Which is partly due to training to create that.
It's first defining, and this may sound simple, but the dawn of that whole idea was when Dan, Kathy, and I agreed, okay, we're going to try to figure out how to do this, and we're going to use the same principles of making sure we have 2 pickles on every sandwich. How are we going to make sure that every customer experiences my pleasure? How are we going to make sure that every customer eventually, once we define the behaviors we wanted, and that was a bunch of research, but once we know the behaviors we want, how are we going to make sure every customer experiences flowers on the table, face-to-face eye contact at the counter, face eye contact out of the drive-thru with a real person, refreshed beverages when nobody even asked for it, clearing away trash when nobody even asked for it, an umbrella when it's raining when nobody even asked for it, carrying large orders to the table or the car without having been asked for it, an interface app that makes it easy for customers to experience Chick-fil-A in any form of service they want, in the drive-thru, in the dining room, pickup, or a delivery. So it's customer-focused. It's not tech-focused. And everything I just described required clear definition of what the behavioral 2 pickles look like, defining those behaviors, then creating training to go with them, creating illustrations outside the Chick-fil-A environment to illustrate them, and doing then a case study of almost 2 years and 200 restaurants to prove to the operator family, oh, by the way, you will make more money doing this. It will not cost you money.
Right.
Because going in, a lot of them thought it was warm, fuzzy stuff, and they weren't going to make any more money.
Right. So it sounds like you're saying, though, and I agree. I'm just calling it out and sort of summarizing what I think you said around what do you do to continue a culture after the founder moves on is you cascade it. You continue to create those stories.
Yes.
You continue long before that person has moved on, so that yes. You've got 100, 200 people now telling the same story versus one.
Correct. Well, yeah. And ideally, you have thousands now.
Right.
I mean, you have operators telling stories. You have hundreds and hundreds of staff members telling the same stories. You have hundreds and hundreds of staff members creating their own stories.
Right.
In the context of Chick-fil-A.
So, Steve,
that's how you do it.
I love this. This is just very inspiring.
Can I make one more comment on that?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. And I follow up.
But the last point of this is an important point.
Sure.
You cannot do it if you have turnover constantly. You cannot do it if you have not just CEO and CMO turnover, but if you have constant turnover in the organization and all your major areas of leadership, including, in our case, a restaurant operator, the local retail leader, you cannot sustain this kind of culture.
Right.
Because everybody who comes in think, oh, I gotta put my fingerprint on this culture.
Right.
I don't agree with that corporate statement. We're going to rewrite that corporate statement. Now, and implicitly, I mean, and I made it right up front, one of the great advantages Chick-fil-A has is being privately owned.
Right.
So you have the continuity there of the same ownership family.
Right.
Which is another reason that corporate purpose has never changed.
Exactly. I get it. So I guess here's my lead into this question, Steve. I was thinking about you might be able to fake it, but people are going to sense a lack of authenticity. So here's my question about this. I think we've seen a lot of great brands out there. We can see it on TVs, on billboards, you name it, magazines and what have you. Compelling stuff. Probably you've got some neuroscience even behind it that helps us understand why we respond to certain things better than something else. With AI and everything else that's becoming now with that sort of accelerated learning process, marketers, I'm sure, are going to town with new ways to be able to hook and get to the subconscious of a person by the way in which they're telling their story. But I guess I have this sense that you could probably have a great brand, at least for some period of time, and have a poor culture. And but at some point, they're going to equal out, right?
Yeah. Well, I mean, we can even reflect in our own lifetime brands who've gone through that cycle. I mean, let's just take in Atlanta, Home Depot, great brand, great customer-oriented brand, went through leadership transitions with CEO, and I'll just be frank, I feel like they got a little too far over into the financial focus column.
Right.
And they started milking the brand almost on a weekly, quarterly basis.
Yeah.
They forgot their cultural roots. What did they have to do? They had to bring the two founders back to the business to reestablish the cultural pillars of the business and literally put them on the road. Same thing happened with Apple. Steve
Jobs. Right.
So it can happen like that when you have leadership changes and people don't really believe why they exist. So for example, Apple, their core purpose is, you probably know it, simplicity.
Right.
The few times that I have studied them when they have had difficulty with a product or a product rollout was when they broke that rule. And they may be on the verge of doing it right now with one of their new AI things.
Right.
It ain't simple.
No.
And It's not being very well received. So I think I think at some point, great brands always come back to their roots. Let me just come back to Chick-fil-A. You've heard the corporate purpose. You've heard the key values. The essence of the brand essence, where good meets gracious, where good meets gracious, is how do you execute honor, dignity, respect in every store? Because that is not what you normally get in a fast food restaurant.
No.
Right? That's the essence of the brand strategy at Chick-fil-A. We're going to treat people with honor, dignity, and respect. We have operators who are leaders who are capable of instilling that kind of vision, attracting the kind of talent to pull that off, to deliver that promise in a genuine, authentic way. And as a result, they attract those kind of people, and those kind of people attract more like them.
So, Steve, let me ask you.
Yes.
So, this is maybe because we could talk for days on this. I so appreciate your time on this, because it's fascinating. I'm listening in on this. I'm going like, Steve, this is great. You mentioned some things like having a founder, having it privately owned, the consistency that creates for being able to protect the brand. Those are wonderful. I'm listening in on this and going like, Steve, that's great, man. I appreciate this. This is wonderful. But I don't work for a company that has those kind of components. I'm working for a company that's owned by private equity, or we're owned by Wall Street investors, or we had a new CEO that just came in yesterday. I realize that there are some kinds of fertile conditions that make cultures easier to grow and maintain. But is all hope lost for the rest of us who don't have those particular conditions in place?
No, I think there's no question. I think the challenge is much steeper. I don't think hope is all lost, because it all comes back to leadership.
Yes.
Now, is it easier if it's privately owned than if it's publicly owned? There's no question about it.
Right.
But if a publicly owned company attracts the right kind of leader, or handful of key leaders, who says, you know what, we're gonna prove to Wall Street in this business that long-term health comes from long-term healthy brands, not chasing quarterly cash flow.
Right.
So the leaders have got to be set up by the board. The board has got to set up those leaders for success as being what the expectation is we want long-term healthy brand.
Yes.
Because we know at the end of the day, that's going to make for a more successful business and a more successful P&L sheet. Here's what happens when you have great brands. People come more often, or they buy more often. They're more than willing to pay full price, and they tell others.
Yes.
Now, what publicly owned company wouldn't like those three virtues? But if you don't attract and empower key leaders to go after that, if on the other hand the board's saying quarterly earnings, we got to match what Wall Street wants.
Right.
It's
very
possible.
difficult. Yeah.
Very difficult.
I was talking to somebody out of this podcast, I don't know, a few weeks ago, and we were discussing, how prevalent the mindset is that people will stay at a company on average, maybe 3 or 4 years. And that becomes sort of just expected. You almost set up your culture and your process and your hiring and your performance management around that sort of statistic that says, well, these particular people at this level may no longer be here in 4 or 5 years, right? So let's plan on that. Right. And I thought, like, wait a minute, why do we set up a business with that mindset? Why don't we set up a business with, not to say you will always achieve it, because I think a vision is probably something that's not achievable, but it's worth to go after. Why not have a vision that we employ people for life? Yes. And that's what we're shooting for. And that's what we were creating a culture around. And it sounds like that's what you were about over at Chick-fil-A.
That's what I got to experience. And I think the reason I got to experience that was because Truett wanted to create a culture that was a win-win culture. Him and whoever he attracted into the business. Yes. Whether it was a staff member or a Chick-fil-A operator. If you win, I win.
Yes.
Operator gets to retain half net pre-tax profit. Well, who gets the other half? Oh, I get the other half. Jerry gets the other half.
Yes.
Staff members. Can you get stock at Chick-fil-A? No, you can't get stock at Chick-fil-A. But one, I want my employees to stay. Two, I want them to be engaged in the business. Three, I want to create a platform for influence. Remember? Okay, so what does he do? He and Jimmy create a profit sharing program that's not tied to corporate profits. It's tied to the profitability of the stores. The more the stores made, the more I made.
Right. It's all good.
So I'm highly incentivized to not only help every store achieve and grow, but as it grows, I'm highly incentivized to stay.
Exactly.
And the bigger picture, Dean, they created a culture and an economic platform for people to fulfill their own personal, family, and even ministry goals. I mean, Diane and I've had the opportunity to do things not only personally and as a family, but even in the area of philanthropics that we never dreamed we'd be able to do, but we were able to do because of that platform that Truett and Jimmy Collins created. Now, can another company do that? Absolutely. And I still consult with predominantly entrepreneur companies, but I'm challenging them all the time. How can you create an environment and an economic model where if you're employed, you win when your employee wins and vice versa?
Right. Steve, this
can be done.
I really could talk to you all day, but I want to ask you one final question. First of all, thank you for the work that you do and the contribution you've made, more so than I probably will ever know. And the contribution you've made to this conversation, it's really been a really inspiring discussion. How can people follow you and find out more about what you're doing?
Okay. Well, thanks for asking. Well, first of all, there's my book, Covert Cows and Chick-fil-A. It's still on Amazon. It's still selling. In fact, it just got published in Korean.
Fantastic.
So,
congratulations.
Yeah. I have a website, srobinsonconsulting.com. So I have articles there. I have links, to speeches I've given, etc. And I'm on LinkedIn. I do not use Facebook. I've got off of Twitter /X.
Yeah.
You have to feed those things. I don't want to spend my time feeding them, but those are the primary ways I can be reached.
With Steve Robinson, there's anything like a middle initial? There's got to be a few Steve Robinsons on LinkedIn.
Yeah, it's Steve A. Robinson.
Steve A. Okay.
Yes, Steve A. Robinson.
Well, Steve A.
If you put in a slash Chick-fil-A, I'm sure it'll come up.
It'll pull it up. Great. Well, Steve A. Robinson, it's been an honor to get to know you and to hear your story and to learn about the great work that you and others at Chick-fil-A have done. And again, just to thank you so much for your energy, your time, your love, your gratitude, and your hospitality with all of this.
Well, Dean, my pleasure. It was my pleasure. I appreciate you inviting me to do it.
You bet.
Thank you for listening to The Business of Intuition. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts, Google, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. If you'd like to learn more about Dean or Mission Facilitators Leadership, go to mfileadership.com. That's mfileadership.com.